If you're studying A-level philosophy and ethics, then subscribe. I'm covering the whole course in this channel. Here we look at a complete A-level guide to meta-ethics, often taught in Year 13 during the Paper 2 A-level ethics course. I will be looking at this in more depth at a later point, but for now, to make you exam ready, here we're going to start with a question that sounds simple, but actually is one of the deepest in the whole of philosophy. When you say stealing is wrong, what are you actually doing? Are you stating a fact about the world, the way you would state that the Earth orbits the Sun? Are you expressing a feeling, the way that you would say, I hate the cold? Are you issuing a command, telling everyone, including yourself, not to steal? Or are you doing something else entirely? Now, this is what meta-ethics asks. Not what we should do. That is the first order ethics, the territory of utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, natural law, and situation ethics. Meta-ethics goes a level deeper. It asks what moral language itself means. What kind of thing is a moral statement? Can it be true or false? Does moral knowledge even exist? And these are the questions that this video is built to answer, completely clearly and in a form that will serve you in that exam room. First order ethics asks, what should I do? Meta-ethics asks, what does good even mean? All three exam boards assess meta-ethics, and examiners consistently reward you if you classify positions precisely, if you deploy vocabulary accurately, over people who just simply describe the theories vaguely without using the right philosophical terms. So precision here is what earns the highest marks. Before you can explain any specific meta-ethical theory, you need to know which of the two fundamental camps it belongs to. This classification is the organizing framework for everything in meta-ethics, and if you get this right, it's the single most important thing you can do in an essay on this topic. Cognitivism. Cognitivism holds that moral statements are genuine propositions. They are truth-apt, and that means they can be true or false in the same way that factual statements about the world can be true or false. When a cognitivist says stealing is wrong, they are making a claim about moral reality, a claim that is either correct or incorrect. Cognitivism includes two major propositions: naturalism and institutionism. Both of them agree that moral statements can be true or false. They disagree about what kind of facts moral statements describe. Non-cognitivism holds that moral statements are not truth-apt at all. They don't describe facts. They're not the kind of thing that can be true or false. When a non-cognitivist says stealing is wrong, they are doing something other than making a factual claim. They're expressing a feeling, issuing a prescription, or something else. Non-cognitivism includes emotivism and prescriptivism. Both of these agree that moral statements are not truth-apt. They disagree about what moral statements are actually doing. And here's the exam tip you must act on every single time that you write about a meta-ethical position. Before you explain it, classify it. Tell the examiner immediately whether what you're talking about is a cognitivist or a non-cognitivist approach. This single move signals command of the topic and earns marks before you've even developed your argument. Now, the first cognitivist position is naturalism, and it's both the most intuitively appealing and the most philosophically vulnerable of all the four positions. Naturalism holds that moral facts are a species of natural facts. Good can be defined in terms of observable properties of the world. Goodness is not mysterious or otherworldly. It is something we can identify, we can measure, and we can verify through ordinary empirical means. So what does this mean in practice? Different naturalists identify different natural properties as the meaning of good. For some, it is pleasure. For others, it is the satisfaction of preferences or the promotion of human flourishing. The core claim here is that good always refers to something real and measurable in the natural world. Now, you've already encountered this in disguise. Bentham and Mill both implicitly assume a naturalist framework. When Jeremy Bentham says good means the maximization of pleasure, he is identifying goodness with a natural, measurable property. And that is naturalism in action. And the appeal is clear. Naturalism keeps ethics connected to the observable world. It avoids having to posit mysterious non-natural moral entities floating somewhere beyond the physical. It aligns with the empiricist tradition of grounding knowledge in experience. And it makes moral claims look reassuringly similar to scientific claims. Verifiable, objective, publicly accessible. But there is a devastating objection waiting, which we're going to look at in the next slide. And it comes from the same philosopher who is also naturalism's most important defender. G.E. Moore, writing at the beginning of the 20th century, produced what remains the most powerful challenge to naturalism, and the remarkable thing is that he himself was a cognitivist. His objection is not that moral facts do not exist. His objection is that they cannot be natural facts. Let's look at the Naturalist Fallacy by Moore. Moore argued that any attempt to define good in terms of a natural property commits what he called the Naturalistic Fallacy. The fallacy is to treat a non-natural concept as if it were natural, to assume that because we can identify a natural property that often accompanies goodness, that property just is what goodness means. And here's how G.E. Moore demonstrated this in the open question argument. Take any natural property like N. Pleasure, happiness, preference, satisfaction, flourishing, whatever you choose. Now ask, is N actually good? And this question is always an open question. It never becomes trivially obvious the way, is a bachelor unmarried? Becomes trivially obvious once you know what a bachelor means. You can always genuinely ask whether pleasure is really good, whether happiness is really good, whether preference, satisfaction is really good, and these remain live philosophical questions that cannot be settled simply by examining the meaning of words. And this proves, Moore argued, that good cannot be equivalent to any natural property. Because if it were, the question, but is N really good, would be as meaningless as asking, but is a bachelor really unmarried? And closely related to this is David Hume's observation about the logical structure of moral arguments. You cannot derive an ought from an is. No matter how many descriptive facts you assemble about the world, they do not logically entail any moral obligation. Facts about what is the case are logically distinct from claims about what ought to be the case. And this is a standard AO2 weapon for your essays. Not just against naturalism, but against utilitarianism, which relies on the natural fact of human pleasure as the foundation for moral obligation. So you can use it in both contexts. Having demolished naturalism, Moore needed to explain how we do know moral truths, because he remained a cognitivist, and his answer was intuitionism. Moore's positive theory is that moral facts are sui generis, a unique, irreducible category of their own, real but not natural. They cannot be broken down into or reduced to any other kind of fact. Goodness is a simple, non-natural property, rather like a colour. You see, you cannot define yellowness in terms of anything else. You just see it. And you just see goodness in the same direct, non-inferential way. We know moral truths through intuition, a direct faculty of moral perception that grasps moral properties immediately, without inference or argument. And W.D. Ross developed this tradition significantly. Rather than focusing on the single property of goodness, Ross argued that we intuit prima facie duties, genuinely binding moral obligations like fidelity, beneficence, non-maleficence, gratitude, and justice. These are real moral obligations. They can be overridden in a specific situations where a stronger competing duty applies, but they're never simply cancelled. They always leave a moral residue. Now, you've already encountered Ross in the Kantian ethics series, where his concept of prima facie duties emerged as a response to the problem of conflicting duties in Kant's framework. And this is a good connection to make in your essays. It shows that you can see the continuity between meta-ethics and normative ethics. The strength of intuitionism here is that it accounts for the apparent objectivity of moral judgments. Our sense that some things are genuinely wrong, that gratuitous cruelty is not merely unpopular, but actually wrong, fits far better with a cognitivist and objectivist account than with non-cognitivism. The weakness is, however, acute. Intuitions conflict between people, cultures, and historical periods. Intuitionism offers no rational procedure for resolving these conflicts. If your intuition says X is wrong and mine says X is permissible, the theory has nothing further to say. We now move to the non-cognitivist camp. Now remember, non-cognitivists deny that moral statements are truth-apt. They do something other than describe facts. The first and most radical non-cognitivist position is emotivism, developed by A.J. Ayer in the 1930s, under the influence of logical positivism. The philosophical movement that held that only empirically verifiable statements are meaningful. You will have learnt some of this in your philosophy of religion course if you study religious language. Ayer's core claim is arrestingly simple. Moral statements are not propositions at all. They are expressions of emotional attitude. When you say stealing is wrong, you are not describing anything. You are expressing your disapproval of stealing, doing something closer to saying boo to stealing than to saying stealing causes harm. No factual claim gets made. No truth value is assigned. Moral disagreement is not a rational debate about facts. It is a clash of feelings. Two people expressing opposite emotional reactions. So what's the strength of this approach? Well, it's philosophically clean. Emotivism sidesteps all the metaphysical difficulties of cognitivism. There's no need to posit mysterious non-natural moral properties floating beyond the physical world. Moral statements are simply expressions of attitude, and attitudes are something we understand perfectly well. But let's look at the weakness. The Frege-Geach problem is devastating. Consider this argument. If lying is wrong, getting your friend to lie is wrong. Lying is wrong. Therefore, getting your friend to lie is wrong. Now, this is a logically valid argument. And lying is wrong appears as both a standalone statement and embedded inside the conditional. But on Ayer's view, lying is wrong is just an expression of emotion. Boo to lying. You see, you cannot embed an emotional exclamation inside a conditional and preserve logical validity. Emotivism cannot account for the fact that moral terms function as logical propositions in valid arguments. And this is a structural problem with the theory. It's a fundamental difficulty. R.M. Hare, Richard Hare, who you may be familiar with by studying religious language with his infamous parable of the lunatic, writing in the mid-20th century, he recognized the Frege Geach problem and attempted to develop a more sophisticated non-cognitivist view that could account for the logical behavior of moral language. Hare's core claim is that moral statements are universal prescriptions, not expressions of emotion, but commands that apply to everyone, including the speaker. When you say lying is wrong, you are prescribing that no one should lie, yourself included. And this is more than a personal feeling. It has a logical structure of a universal rule. And because Hare builds universality directly into the nature of moral language, rather than deriving it from reason, as Immanuel Kant does, his account of moral discourse is connected to, but distinct from, Kantian ethics. Now, the strength of this approach is considerable. Prescriptivism explains why moral language motivates action. It is commanding by its very nature. It explains the universality of moral judgments without requiring mysterious non-natural properties. And it avoids the crude subjectivism of emotivism by insisting that genuine moral judgments must apply universally. But the weakness is the fanatic problem. And it's one that Hare himself acknowledges with admirable honesty. A fanatic who consistently and universally prescribes something morally abhorrent, racial hatred for example, technically satisfies the requirements of prescriptivism. Their prescriptions are universal. They apply to themselves as much as to others. But universality alone cannot rule out monstrous positions that are consistently held. And Hare tries to resolve this by appealing to the interests of all persons. But critics argued this moved prescriptivism closer to utilitarianism than to a pure meta-ethical theory. So here I compare the four positions and give you an essay scaffold. So before you go ahead and write a single sentence of analysis on metaethics in your exam, you should be able to place any position accurately within this table. The four positions and their key features. Naturalism. It is cognitivist, it is truth-apt, and its key claim is that good equals a natural property like pleasure or flourishing. Its key weakness is More's naturalistic fallacy and open question argument. Intuitionism is cognitivist, it is truth-apt, and its key claim is that moral facts are sui generis, real but non-natural, known by direct intuition. Key weakness here is the conflicting intuitions with no rational adjudication mechanism. Emotivism is non-cognitivist. It isn't truth-apt. And its key claim is that moral statements express emotional attitude. But its key weakness is the Frege Geach problem. Moral terms function logically in ways that emotion cannot account for. And finally, prescriptivism, which is also non-cognitive and is not truth-apt. Its key claim is that moral statements are universal prescriptions. And its key weakness is the fanatic problem. Universality alone cannot exclude consistently held abhorrent positions. Now, the exam move is always the same. Classify it first, explain it second, then evaluate it third. Never explain a meta-ethical theory without first naming the camp which it belongs to, that you can see on this table. And never state a weakness without explaining why it is philosophically damaging. Not just that the objection exists, but why does it threaten the very foundations of the theory? So now let us consolidate what matters for your essay performance. The three most powerful objections: more versus naturalism. The open question always remains open. For any natural property, N, you identify as good. The question, but is N actually good, is never closed by the definition alone. And this proves that good cannot be equivalent to any natural property. This objection also applies directly against utilitarianism. Deploy it in both meta-ethics questions and normative ethics questions. Then you have the Frege-Geach versus Emotivism. Moral language functions logically in valid arguments. Mere expressions of emotion cannot enter valid logical inferences. And this is a structural problem that emotivism just simply cannot resolve without fundamentally revising its entire core claim. And then there's the fanatic versus prescriptivism. Universality alone cannot rule out consistently held monstrous moral stances. A theory of moral language that can accommodate a consistent racist has something seriously wrong with it. Now, how does meta-ethics connect to normative ethics? Well, your meta-ethical position has real consequences for first-order moral theories. A naturalist can consistently support utilitarianism. Both ground ethics in observable natural facts, and non-cognitive undermines any claim that normative theories describe moral truth, because on non-cognitive views, there is no moral truth to describe. And the three most common exam mistakes that you need to avoid is simply don't confuse emotivism with prescriptivism. Both of them are non-cognitivist, but emotivism expresses feeling, whilst prescriptivism issues universal commands. And these are different claims with different objections. Secondly, do not call intuitionism non-cognitivist. It is a firmly cognitivist position. We know moral truths on this view, even if not through natural observation. And finally, don't treat the naturalistic fallacy as simply the is-ought gap. They are related, but they're also distinct. Hume's is-ought gap is a logical point about the relationship between descriptive and normative claims. G.E. Moore's open question argument is a specific philosophical demonstration that good cannot be reduced to any natural property. So here are some type of exam questions that appear on meta-ethics across the three exam boards, just so you know what you're preparing for. OCR, Edexcel, and AQA all ask questions structured around the stems. Critically assess the view that moral statements are neither true nor false. Evaluate the claim that good cannot be defined in natural terms. To what extent does intuitionism provide a satisfactory account of moral knowledge? Assess the strengths and weaknesses of emotivism as a meta-ethical theory. You will recognize the trigger words there based on the exam board that you do. But notice the pattern. Every question across the exam boards are asking you to evaluate a specific claim or a specific theory. And that means your answer needs classification, precise explanation of the theory, and deployment of the strongest objection, and a reasoned verdict on whether the objection is fatal or whether it can be answered. And the must-know terminology that you need to use precisely and not just approximately is here. Metaethics, cognitivism, non-cognitivism. Truth apt, naturalism, naturalistic fallacy. Open question argument, is ought gap. Intuitionism, sui generis, prima facie. Emotivism, frige geach problem. Prescriptivism, universability. And here's the single most important advice for this whole topic. Metaethics rewards precision above everything else. One well-deployed objection, fully explained, setting up the objection clearly, showing why it damages the theory, assessing whether it can be answered, will outscore 3 shallow objections that are listed in a sequence every time. So know your positions, classify precisely, explain with depth, deploy 1 or 2 objections with real force, and reach a verdict and defend it.